This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido Trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Are your out-of-the-box industries looking a little plain? Tully Models can help. With a wide variety of industrial and agricultural details and a bunch of new releases, Tully Models is sure to have the super details you need to bring your industries to the next level. Place your order today at tullymodels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. Most model railroaders begin with trains. Dawn Quest began with a paintbrush. What started as a simple favor led to film-inspired exhibition layouts, a growing YouTube channel, and a mission to make the hobby more creative, approachable, and welcoming. On this episode, we'll ask Dawn how she found model railroading and how she's helping others find their way into it. All the way from the UK, Dawn Quest. Dawn, welcome to Around the Layout podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure. And what an introduction. Thank you so much.
Glad to have you here. I've been following your YouTube channel. We'll get into that in a bit about how you rolled into YouTube as part of the hobby and sharing it with folks around the globe. But first, let's find out a little bit about your journey. So, Dawn, model railroading was apparently nowhere on your radar until a friend asked you to paint some figures. And take us back to that moment. What did you see in the hobby that made you want to explore it beyond that first painting project?
Well, as you said, a friend asked me because he realized that I like painting. I do a bit of painting, and he thought I would be better at painting the figures on his layout than he was. So I had a go, but I just thought I was going to help out this one time. But when I looked at his layout, I started to see all the wonderful scenery, the buildings, the trees, and I just was kind of engrossed, really. And I thought I could do that. And I was a little bit tempted. So I really wanted to start doing a little bit more modeling. And then I went to my very first model railway show. It was quite a small show, maybe 5 or 6 layouts. And I was just blown away. All the preconceptions I may have had about model railroading just went out the window because all I could see were these wonderful little worlds. And I was just so excited. And at that moment, I thought, I want to do this too. I'd love to build an exhibition layout.
What were you doing hobby-wise before this? You mentioned painting. Talk about your hobbies before discovering model railways.
Well, I've always, been someone who loves doing lots of things. So I crochet, I write, I love to read, but most of all, I do love to paint, and I've painted a few canvases, but mainly for my own enjoyment, really. It's very therapeutic. And as I said, it's just something I've always loved to do. And my friend knew this and saw some of my canvases and thought, well, there's someone who can use a paintbrush. So it wasn't too far of a stretch of the imagination to just swap a larger paintbrush for a smaller one and just do the detail on the figures. And one of the joys of doing the figures was each of these characters was unique and just giving them, I love the whole concept of giving them different outfits. I really loved, choosing which colors for the coat and which color for the hat and making them all different. So that was interesting. And it just captured my imagination.
Yeah, I was going to say, it must be a little bit of a different expression of creativity between, say, flat canvas painting and then getting into model railways in that three-dimensional aspect of art.
Well, yes, of course. With a flat canvas, you are solely responsible for putting light and shade and tone and so on. But of course, when you're painting a 3D model, natural light will create that light and shade itself. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But then again, I like to focus on detail. I love the detail in model railways, and I love the detail in painting on canvas. So you can really kind of double down on the detail on a model. And I know some people who go so far as to paint each brick on a house or a structure individually. I wouldn't say I go that far, but I do love creating almost realistic effects, with brickwork and trees and so on and so forth.
So you did this favor for the friend. When does it become yours? When do you start on your own, and what do those steps look like?
So after I'd, painted the figures on his layout, after I'd been to a model railway show, and then I started to look at my own workspace. I was using my dining room table to paint and so on. And I started looking, I went to a few modeling shops and started to look at the bits and pieces. And then it was really a question of, how do I start this? How do I create a layout? And this was a whole new world to me. I didn't know my gauges from my scales, from the materials. And so really it was a complete learning experience. And of course, I was able to ask my friend there about, how to start and how to build a baseboard and so on and so forth. And also use YouTube a lot, because there was quite a bit on YouTube. It was really a question of, I'm going to start just by experimenting with some modeling at home and trying some techniques and, seeing if I could kind of get to grips with this whole new art form, I guess, if you wanted to call it that. But then it really was, well, look, I want to build an exhibition layout. I have an idea. So let's just jump in the deep end and get a baseboard and really learn as I went.
Talk about that push to go, to not be intimidated by this whole new thing, because it's vast. The model railway and model railroading in general is a very vast place to be. Talk about not being intimidated jumping into it.
I think I was blessed because I didn't know what I didn't know, if you see what I mean. I was ignorant. And
yeah,
looking back, the amount of stuff I didn't know, if I'd kind of realized at the time, I think I would have just been paralyzed with overwhelm. But I was blissfully ignorant. So it was like, well, how hard can this be, really? I had the confidence of a complete beginner, kind of thinking, well, this should be all right. So, it was not knowing what I was diving into, really, that helped. And then it was just a question of, let's just take this step by step. I'd never done it before, so I didn't really set myself any huge expectations. And the idea I had, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, was something I hadn't seen done before. So again, it wasn't like I had to follow a strict rule book. I was doing what I do with painting, and that was creating my own world in my own way and my own vision. But obviously I had to learn a few techniques along the way, like how do you build a baseboard and how do you manage wiring and all of those things.
You mentioned again that you had the friend that you painted the figures for. You're going to exhibitions, you're going to model railroad shops. Sounds like you did a lot of research on the hobby even before getting started. Talk about the learning process and how you were able to get yourself at least up to the level where you felt confident to get started.
2 or 3 years ago, there was still, there was a lot on YouTube, and watching other YouTubers and model railroaders at the time and seeing how, quite a few tutorials to follow. But, I had quite a group of people when I started talking to more to other people in the hobby. There was lots of help on hand. Sometimes it was helpful, sometimes it wasn't so helpful because it can get a bit confusing. But the very first thing was, look, I want to build this. I have this idea for a layout. Let's just grab a pencil and paper and sketch it out. And, I didn't know a first thing about how to lay the track and what to do with it. So I was given, a lot of suggestions, a lot of advice. And in the end, I kind of went with what I thought would work. I knew when I built the layout that I wanted it to fit in the back of my car. If I was going to take it out to shows, I wanted to fit it in the back of my car. I wanted it to be light enough that I could carry it, and just easy to put together and assemble when I left a show. So those were the criteria. Also, it had to be able to, be moved from the room I built it in. So that dictated the specifics and the dimensions. And so I mapped out where I wanted the track, where I wanted the buildings, how I wanted it to look. I kind of wanted an idea of it not just being flat. I wanted it on a couple of layers and levels to create a bit of interest. Again, like looking at a painting, I wanted the eye to be able to travel along the layout and to focus on key points. So yeah, it was kind of an iterative process. I think several of the pieces I put onto the layout to begin with were ripped out. I must have there was one building I built 3 times. I still didn't get it right. It was the most tricky building I've ever built. And I was about ready to throw that in the garbage can. But trial and error and patience.
You seem to have started kind of, at least in my view, kind of in the middle, scratch building and doing all these things, where most that we hear about start in a very elementary way, right? Very simple buildings. You really kind of dove all the way into this.
I think as well, because my background wasn't model railways, I didn't grow up with model railways. I knew nothing about locomotives. And I didn't really have those rules and the unspoken rules of this is how you do things. You must do A, B, C in this order. I came to it right in the middle, and I think that was quite liberating. So I wasn't bound by expectations from other people or a group of people who said, no, you can't do that. You mustn't do it this way. I was free to do it how I wanted to do it. And I think that's true now more than even 2 or 3 years ago. I think people are becoming more experimental with layouts and don't necessarily follow the rules or start at A and then proceed to B. I think people come to the hobby at whatever level they're ready to embrace it, really.
Well, there certainly are standards, but I have yet to find a rule book on model railroading. So I with that non-existing, like you said, kind of that perceived thing and breaking that mold, it seemingly has now opened up for even more new ideas. And isn't that the beauty of our hobby?
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? When I go to shows, I go to a lot of model railway shows now, and I'm seeing so many different ways of building a model railroad. It's wonderful. And I know that the hobby will always be, there will always be, I guess a majority who loves the prototypical layout. And that's wonderful, to create a reproduction of an exact place at an exact time with the exact models and buildings of that period and era. But I'm seeing incredible layouts. I've seen one built in a beer barrel. I've seen one built in a guitar case. I've seen futuristic model railroad layouts, based on there's a layout called Gamma Silo Rotatory, which is set in the future. I've seen Warhammer layouts and sci-fi layouts. It's incredible. And it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but as you say, that is the beauty of the hobby, isn't it? It should be for everyone, and everyone has a vision of how they want their layout to be.
Coming from the world of painting, and painting being a very subjective hobby, I mean, there's worlds where people do things where they're throwing paint at canvases and it becomes the most beautiful thing, to people that are really trying to paint detail. And there's just this whole spectrum of painting. By coming from that wildly subjective world, did that help you in your model railway journey?
I think so. Because I'd learned really early on to paint in the way that felt natural to me. And my painting is by default your own expression, isn't it? As you say, there's no one right way to paint a field or a cow, or everyone has their own interpretations. You can be hyper realistic, or you can be abstract, you can be impressionist. And I think it's all about your personality. When you build a layout, you stamp it with your own personality. And I do feel that when I look at my 2 layouts now, I think you can tell that they're mine, because they share characteristics which I feel only I could have created. And when you look at other people's layouts, if they've done 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can say, oh, that's a John Smith's layout, or that's a Jane, Williams layout, or whatever, making up names here. But do you know what I mean? It's like the creators put their own stamp on the layout and it becomes a unique thing. It's like a fingerprint. No two people can create the same layout. They might try, but it will always be slightly different and subtle, and the nuances will be, there'll be nuances to it.
It's better with a signature, isn't it? With their own impression of their interpretation of the world.
Absolutely, because I think we have to remember, after all, this is a hobby, and hobbies are not meant to be work. Hobbies are meant to be something you do after work, or in between work. And hobbies, by default, are things that we're meant to enjoy. And I wonder how much enjoyment people can get if they're always following somebody else's view or somebody else's idea. Or it should be, I talk to so many model railroaders who tell me that their railroad modeling is therapeutic. They get lost in the flow. They get lost in their world. And I feel that if it became a set of rules that you must do it this way and you must build it that way, then it just becomes like school or work, and it loses its enjoyment. I think in the joy of it lies on the very edge of what you're creating. What can I do next? How can I do this? What can I build with that? How would I transform my vision into something 3D? That's the joy and excitement of it. And when you actually make it real, you turn that idea into something that you can physically hold and touch and, build and create, then that's the joy. And thank goodness that we can all do it in our own way. And that also includes people who want to model reproductions. We call them rivet counters here in the UK. I don't know if you have the same term in the US, but people
same
who
here, yes.
will literally count the rivets to make sure that. And I love that. I think that's something to be celebrated, because we need every single kind of personality in this hobby. And if we didn't have the rivet counters, we wouldn't have the opposite. So I just love how everybody has their own take on building their own railway.
You mentioned before about those that model the prototype, but you took a completely different direction. And instead of being inspired by the real railways, you went to the big screen for inspiration. Talk about how the idea of building modules based on movies came to life.
It was quite a simple moment, really. My background is TV. I'm a TV producer, and I was a journalist and TV producer. And so, I guess, and when I write, I think very visually. I like to write. I like to write fiction. When I write, I'm always thinking about what it might look like on a screen. And so I do love film, and I love the classics. And one of the great British classics is a film called Brief Encounter, black and white, filmed in 1945. And it was at the time that I had gone to the Model Railway Show and thought, oh, I'd really love to do this. And I was trying to think about, what can I build? What layout can I build? And obviously I'd seen ideas and suggestions. Will it be a landscape? Will it be a town? Will it be a village? But one Saturday afternoon, I was sitting I had the TV on. I was flicking through the channels, and I came across Brief Encounter. And to be honest, I'd never seen the film from start to finish. So I thought, well, let's watch this for a bit. And then, of course, the film is based around a railway station, Milford Junction. And I thought, well, a railway station, 1945, this would be a great layout to do. But then I thought, well, there are quite a few layouts that feature railway stations set around the 40s, 50s, maybe. What about doing it as the director, David Lean, did it in black and white? And as I was sitting there, I had kind of a goosebump moment where I thought, well, that would be very, very different. And I love different. I love doing things a little bit differently. But then I thought, well, no, I Googled to see if anyone had done it. And I couldn't find anyone who'd actually built Brief Encounter at all, let alone in black and white. And I couldn't actually find anyone who'd done a model railroad in black and white either. So then I thought, well, maybe there's a reason. maybe there's a reason no one's doing this in black and white. But I was caught by the idea. I thought, well, I was excited by the idea. And after that, I just couldn't let it go. And so I started experimenting a little bit, painting on some, just some pieces of wood, just shades of gray, just to see how I would do it. And then that was it. I thought, well, it's going to be in black and white, but I didn't want it to be purely black and white. I imagined shades of gray. And that's basically how it transpired. It was a complete experiment. Didn't know what I was, had no kind of anything in the real world to kind of base it on. But after Brief Encounter, then everyone was asking me, well, what's your second layout going to be? Is it going to be black and white, or is it going to be based on a film? And I felt that I really didn't want to do another black and white layout because Brief Encounter is unique. I think if I did another black and white one, it would dilute the uniqueness of Brief Encounter. So I looked around for another film, and so many people gave me loads of suggestions. And then I saw The Ladykillers. It's a favorite of mine, 1955, the first Ealing comedy to be filmed in color. And it's such a fantastic film. So that was it. I was sold on that. And Ladykillers became my second layout. And now I'm thinking about what my third one's going to be.
Before we leave and head towards the Ladykillers in your next module, let's go back to the Brief Encounter one. During the process, talk about learning the hobby as you're creating what is really completely different. So you're trying to learn skills in the hobby, but yet you're doing something that most people would do something somebody else has done, but you're learning it in a little bit different way because you're producing something that's unique. Talk about the challenges of that.
Well, I think the biggest challenge, of course, was the painting. And I was very worried that, one, I would get bored of painting in black and white because most of my canvases are in color. And my second worry was that actually when it was finished, it might look boring. I thought, either I'd be bored or it would be boring because I was worried that it would just look flat and dull. But I ended up using so many different tones and shades that it became actually a really wonderful experiment. And to begin with, I was very scientific about it. I would take photos on my phone and then turn them black and white. So I take photos of red phone boxes and post boxes here in the UK, turn them black and white, and then match those tones to anything on my layout. By the end of it, I was getting a bit liberal and I was just mixing blacks and whites, and also, added in some browns and blues to create different cool and warm tones. And I say that, there's the obvious joke about the number of shades of grey, but I lost count at the shades of grey at 32. I counted 32
Wow.
different shades of grey, and then I lost count because I was just making more and more. But it literally became, by the end of it, I was holding up one building against another and saying, does that look right against that? Do those greys work together? And there's that old saying, if it looks right, it is right. And that's kind of how it worked. But I learned that some tones do not work with others. Warm greys do not sit well with cool greys. And the hardest part was painting the locos. I either scratch built everything or repainted everything. And of course, the rolling stock I had to repaint. I had a very expensive tram, and my heart was in my mouth when I came to paint it, and I painted it completely the wrong color. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've ruined this. I've ruined it. But I managed to use some paint remover, got it all off and did it again. But again, trial and error with the painting. And I like to say that we are so used to seeing black and white in 2D, photographs or films. But we're not used to seeing black and white in 3D. So when you look at Brief Encounter, and actually I'm looking at it right now, past my laptop, I can see it. When you look at black and white in 3D, it really does play tricks with your mind. And people say that to me all the time, it really makes your eyes go a little bit funny.
Most folks that I know, and including myself, we do site visits or we're looking up areas that we're looking to model. Even if you're doing it in a freelance way, it may be based on some form of reality. But I would imagine the research for you involved a pause button quite often, didn't it?
Absolutely. More so for Ladykillers, I have to say, because the set for Ladykillers was incredible. But with Brief Encounter, it literally was watch this film over and over and over again, pause button, look at the scenery, look at the backdrops, and so on and so forth. I did a lot of research into filming in black and white and the use of colors and how I could transpose them onto the layout. I did a lot of research into where the film was made, because it was filmed at the end of 44 and 45 during the Second World War. So, of course, David Lean and his crew couldn't do a lot of the night scenes around London because, of course, it would attract the attention of the Luftwaffe. It was the World War II at the time. So the station is meant to be Milford Junction, which is a fictional station, and it's meant to be on the outskirts of London. But actually, in reality, it was filmed up in Lancashire in the north at a station called Carnforth. And if you visit Carnforth, you now can see the Brief Encounter, the Heritage Centre there, where it's a shrine to all things Brief Encounter. It's a wonderful place. So I learned a lot about the making of the film. I learned a lot about the locations. A lot of the location was filmed at Watford Junction here as well. And it was just a fascinating glimpse into what the reality that everybody lived at the time. And I hope I've put that on the layout and people can sense that.
Talk about the reaction when you take this to its first exhibition and people get their eyes on it.
Very, very nerve-wracking. I don't.
Why?
Well,
What caused it to be so nerve-wracking for you?
Because I was aware that I was a beginner compared to a lot of the other layouts, exhibits. Some of these modelers have been doing this since they were knee-high to a grasshopper, and are experts in their field. And I felt a bit like some upstart that had come along and, oh, look at my layout. It's black and white. But at the same time, I had started my YouTube channel. So people had started to see Brief Encounter, if only on YouTube. So it wasn't like people hadn't kind of become aware of it. But still at that time with the first show was actually a Woolwich Model Railway show. And pretty soon I had a crowd of people around the layout. And some shook their heads as if to say, I'm not really sure about this. But luckily, the majority, there was a lot of interest and a lot of kind of shock, really, because people do say to me, I've never seen a layout like this before. And I've added a lot of little details onto the layout, little jokes, little signs and jokes and shop signage, which makes people laugh. So there's lots to see. But yeah, I think it was one, I'm a woman in the hobby, which is unusual in that respect. But two, I'm here with a black and white layout. And I did wonder if people might think, who does she think she is?
Well, you brought a whole bunch of uniqueness to this exhibition, one with all the reasons you mentioned, woman in the hobby and the black and white layout and a totally different approach doing a movie. You just found all the different ways to be unique. And I can imagine that being very intimidating. How do you get past that intimidation when it's a podcast or a YouTube or your own layouts or paintings or anything else? When you put it out to the world of public opinion and that court of public opinion, it's not easy all the time to be able to handle that.
No, I have to say that I've been incredibly lucky and I'm so grateful because the overwhelming majority of people have been so kind in the hobby, so kind and supportive. And I couldn't ask for a better, response really from the hobby itself. And it's just been wonderful. There have been a couple of detractors, let's say. I feel that if people don't like what you've done with the layout, that's great. We should all respect each other's opinions and feelings. And, Brief Encounter may not be everyone's cup of tea, and I respect that. But I think sometimes, and I think you get it in every hobby and in all walks of life, there will always be a few killjoys, won't there, who aren't content to just say that they don't agree with how you've done something or don't like what you've done. But I don't know, they just go a little bit too far, perhaps. But mostly, I would say that's the minority. And you just learn to sweep that aside and focus. It's so easy to focus on the negative comments. You get 10 positive comments and one negative comment, and the negative comment is the only one you remember. And it's so easy to do that. But then you have to remind yourself, most people love what you're doing, but also that you love what you're doing. I love what I'm doing. And it gives me enjoyment. It gives me joy. It gives me a creative outlet. I just love learning. I'm still learning this hobby. And just to remind myself why I'm doing it. So that's the thing I stick to, really.
When you have folks coming up and they're seeing this is a film from 1945. Were there folks that looked at it that may not have known about your project and then went, wow, I know this? Did you get that relatability from it?
I did, because of course there are people who came to the shows who remember that period in history. A lot of people know the film and love the film, so loved to see it in 3D form, and obviously look for the main characters played by Trevor Howard and Celia Johnson. They are on the layout. I have to point them out. A lot of the signage is using posters and signs that are reproductions of that era. So for products that were around at the time. And there's something, I don't think you have it in the States. It's called peas pudding. And it was a wartime food, if you can call it that was made with peas and spices, and apparently that was part of what everybody ate at the time. And I get people coming up, peas pudding, lovely, lovely. That brings back so many memories. And I've never eaten this stuff in my whole life. I like that aspect of it, that some people stand and look at the layout and I can see that they're transported back to their childhood or when they were younger. But I think that's true of all or most model railways, isn't it? The nostalgia. And I think people love layouts that remind them of their childhoods or their younger days or happier days. And I think when we build model railways, we bring those memories to life.
I think some layouts more than others get that reaction or get that idea of more relatability. Were there things that you were putting in there that you knew were going to be those types of things, or were they kind of surprises and nice happy accidents that people were reacting so much to them?
I think they were happy accidents, really, because in trying to reproduce or recreate the 1940s, I scanned and looked and researched the signage of the time and, what people wore at the time and what was playing in the local cinema and those kinds of things. It really was just part of the research. I don't think I fully understood at the time I was building it how much it would touch a soft spot in people, how much it would reverberate or mean to people when they saw these little signs. And I think because you see this on lots of layouts, a lot of model railroad layouts have, from the 1940s, from the 1950s, have this signage. But I think with Brief Encounter, because it is black and white and shades of grey, a lot of these details stand out a lot more than if it was in colour. And I think it is like looking at an old photograph or an old film. And I think that's what adds to the nostalgia. That did surprise me.
You mentioned the Ladykillers and that being your second module that you build. And you said you got a lot of people giving you a lot of ideas and bringing them forward. What made the Ladykillers the right choice?
Oh, well, I think it's quintessentially British. It's a wonderful film. I have watched it, I probably no less than 100 times. And every time I watch it, I still love every second of it. It's a brilliant story, a brilliant cast. It was filmed in Eastman color, and it has that very unique kind of vintage classic Ealing comedy feel to it. And as here in the UK, if you're a certain age, you grew up on Ealing comedies. I remember watching the Ealing comedies as I was growing up as a teenager, and they occupy a very, very special place in my heart, as they do for a lot of British people. And so that in itself, but I think the most important thing is the Ladykillers is that the railroad and the locomotives are absolutely central to the plot. It's almost like the railway is the part of the cast. It should have its name in lights, because it was filmed in an area of London which was, in the 50s, was very industrial. Steam was, it was the transition from the old locos through to the diesel and so on and so forth. But it was a classic time in British railroad history. And if you look at some of the outtakes from the film, the locos were amazing. The huge beasts with steam billowing into the sky, and the atmosphere of the film, I think, is what I most wanted to capture on the layout, and hopefully I did.
It sounds like the trains were characters themselves.
They really were. I missed out on that era of British railroad history. I grew up in a whole different era of trains, if you like. But they were, if you've watched the Ladykillers, you realize that the signals, the tracks, the locomotives, the steam, it all plays a part in the film in creating this incredible atmosphere. And everything is grimy and soot covered, and it's very much portrays London of its time. And that whole area around King's Cross Station is fascinating, absolutely fascinating area. It's all gentrified now, it's all full of expensive coffee shops and and artisanal bread and those kinds of things. But at the time, it was just an incredibly rich, wonderful, grimy part of London. And you can feel that when you watch the Ladykillers.
There's an aspect I can imagine in the research. We talked about researching Brief Encounter and how you pause and look at it. Now with Ladykillers, and I would imagine the research process was similar to that. Talk about now it's something in color and interpreting the colors from that film and being able to apply it, because I think that's relatable to a lot of folks who are modeling past eras where they're watching historical film and being able to try to interpret what that looked like, even though it's in an older format.
Well, exactly. It's a challenge, isn't it? Because we have to remember that the film itself isn't representative of the color, the actual color. Depending on the type of film that was used to film the locos and the scenery, red might turn, might be scarlet, or it might be crimson, or it might be vermilion. You just don't know if you're looking at something back in history. Certainly with the black and white, with Brief Encounter, if you're watching a film, I learned a lot about the wardrobe, for example. The actresses had to wear green lipstick because red lipstick would just turn out black. So what you're seeing on film isn't necessarily, if you're using film to as a basis for the color you use on your layout, it's a wide spectrum of whether you're going to get it right or not. But that's what I loved about it. And Eastman color is I believe it's the next one on from Technicolor. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very specific type of color, just like in the 70s. Do you remember in the 70s, we all used a certain kind of film and everything was orange and brown, and the film we use is very specific. But I definitely I thought it was going to be easier to paint in color because that's what I was used to. But actually I found it harder because painting in color makes us a little bit lazier, I think. With black and white, you have to be quite specific because it's all about light and shade and making sure that, the two shades work well together. With color, you could just paint the leaves of a tree green and the trunk brown, and Bob's your uncle, there's a tree. But actually, it's so much harder to paint in color. I think people use color it can get quite lazy about using it. So with Ladykillers, I wanted it to be this bright, kind of almost Technicolor, but I didn't want it to just be a mass of color. So I focused on two main colors, which was a turquoisey green, a vintage green, and almost a raspberry red. And you can see those colors predominantly throughout the layout, in the buildings and doors and costumes. But then, of course, I have smatterings of other color because I just didn't want it to become this bright, kaleidoscope of colors. I wanted it to still feel very tonal and very cohesive. And I think I achieved that with the use of the colors I did.
Two exhibition layouts, smaller layouts. I know that the United Kingdom leads the way in small layouts and have been able to develop that. And that's really kind of a takeover here in the US as real estate prices increase. And it's also a great way for folks to get into the hobby. Talk about your choice to do that. Obviously, I know one being exhibitions, but talk about the advantages that gave you in building.
Well, the number one advantage is you can build more than one layout and still be able to keep it in your house. As you say, our homes do tend to be on the smaller side here. And lots of people, especially younger people coming up who, maybe in university accommodation or have a small flat, or young families, space is at a premium. So small is beautiful. And I am forever telling people or asking people, have you got a layout? And they say, no, we don't have room. I'm forever telling them you do not need a lot of space to build a layout. I've seen layouts built in drawers. I've seen layouts built on bunk beds. I've seen layouts built on shelves. Obviously with Kato, they're doing their mini dioramas. I've seen a layout in a coconut. There's a wonderful model railway builder called Small and Working, and he builds layouts in picnic boxes and packed lunch boxes and a coconut. So wow. Small is beautiful, but the advantage is, just like me, when I finished Brief Encounter, I knew I could build the second one and still keep it in my house. And now I'm building the third one. Space is getting a little bit tight, I have to say, but I'm going to see if I can shoehorn another layout into the house before I have to build an extension.
Let's just play what if here. If you were given a big, beautiful home in the UK countryside and you had thousands upon square feet, do you still think your approach would be smaller layouts?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. And I think, having visited the US in January and been invited into the home of a lovely couple, Mike and Julia, and seen their basement layout, I do see the attraction of having a big, big layout and just to run trains, because obviously with a smaller layout, both my layouts are end to end. I have a DC shutter control on my, I do on the Ladykillers have one loop, but it's quite limited. So it would be wonderful to have a large scale layout where I could literally run trains and spend all day running trains according to a timetable and according to how it is, it is in real life. So I do see that appeal, but I don't think I will ever lose the love of building smaller layouts, because I do love taking them out to exhibitions. And if something that you can just put in the back of your car makes things easier, but also keeps costs down for model railway shows here, because in the UK, a model railway club or a model railway show will pay exhibitors' expenses to bring their layout. So if I can put my layout in the back of a car and only charge a small amount for fuel, then that's all well and good.
It just seems like it also plays into that love of diversity. And you talk about a third module coming soon. Space constraints may change things, but at least a third one, maybe more. Talk about making that choice for what you're going to do with your third module. Do you got people submitting a ton of more ideas to you?
Oh, I do. It's been wonderful, I have to say, because I now know so many more films or movies that have railroads in them. Some fantastic ones stretching back to The Train, The General, the classics, absolute classics. I've narrowed it down to two. There are two possibilities. One is Northwest Frontier, starring Kenneth More and Lauren Bacall, which another British film. The other one is the 1978 film of the Great Train Robbery, starring Sean Connery and Donald Sutherland, which was is based on an actual robbery here in the UK in 1855 of a train that ran from London to Folkestone, and it was hijacked and they robbed it of its gold. But like all great films, it wasn't filmed in London, it was filmed in Ireland. So that would, again, I love that kind of play on the location where it was filmed isn't quite the location where it was based. So I've narrowed it down to two, but then now a spanner in the works, because just last week I went to see this incredible play up in Nottingham called The Market Deeping Model Railway Club, which is based on a real life event. And one of the characters was building a model railway layout based on the film Von Ryan's Express with Frank Sinatra. So now what do? I'm really stuck.
What is some of the criteria for picking a movie? Does it have to be UK based? Do you think you would ever step out and do, say, a US based or maybe even somewhere else around the world? Would that ever appeal to you, or is it got to be British based?
Oh, it could anywhere really, not just British based. I think it's more about, does the film have enough in it that I can create a layout out of it? It can't just be one scene with a train. or a loco, it has to have a little bit more to it. So, and will the landscape be captivating enough? Is it different enough? When you go to a model railway show here in the UK, there are a lot of layouts that they're all incredible and the modelling is wonderful, but there's a lot of layouts based on branch lines, which have a railway station set in green fields, and they can look very, very similar, but, you know, they're all wonderful and beautiful and incredibly inspirational. But I like to do something a little bit different, something that people will walk by and stop and think, that's different. It will catch their eye. And certainly with Northwest Frontier, it's set in India. So you'd have the golden sands of, the desert and the colors of India. The Great Train Robberies filmed in Ireland. So very rich greens and, the Emerald Isle, it's called. So it doesn't have to be British. It doesn't have to be a British film, but there has to be enough of the plot and the landscape to create something that I can really get my teeth into and also love. Because if you're going to be building a model railroad for 5+ months, however long it takes, then you've got to love it, right?
How long does that process usually take for you to figure out what you're going to do? Like when you went from Brief Encounter to the Ladykillers, how long did it take you to finally settle on the Ladykillers?
It wasn't that long, actually, because I think The Ladykillers is such a great film that I was excited from the get-go. This time round is taking me a little bit longer, I have to say. And maybe it's because I'm starting to feel the nerves of, I've done one layout, I've done 2 layouts, and now the pressure's on a little bit. And I feel I don't want to disappoint people. And everyone has their opinion of what a great movie layout would be. And I think it's that feeling of I don't want to disappoint people. So it's taking me a little bit longer this time round.
Yeah, I think that pressure is actually something very interesting, right? Like trying to, maybe called catching lightning in a bottle twice kind of feeling. How do you make this project match what you've been doing, but let it have its own uniqueness?
I think it has to stand alone as a layout. It can't just be the third in a series. It has to be, if no one knew about Brief Encounter or knew about the Ladykillers, it would have to earn its stripes, so to speak, as a layout that has all the right parts, the loco, the track, the scenery. It has to be something that people go, wow, that's something special. And I hadn't thought about that. And I didn't realize. And this is, this is based on a film. And the film, I remember that when I watched that when I was a kid, or I watched that 10 years ago, or I think it just has to make people, it's like when you scroll on your phone, it has to make you stop. So I think that's the criteria. Is there enough in this layout that people will stop and enjoy looking at it? Because when you create an exhibition layout, you're putting on a show. You owe people a show. You owe people something that's worth their time stopping and looking at it.
I think that could also translate to folks that aren't doing movie-based, they're doing prototype-based or creating a freelance, creating a story where they don't need to have all the background information to understand it or appreciate it. And that sounds like what you're talking about here for your next build and even what you've done with the previous 2.
Yeah, I know layout builders here who spend years researching a proper place, a location, just to make sure they've got every tiny brick in the right place. And my goodness, I'm in awe of modelers who can build those layouts. For me, I feel I'm a little bit, I don't know, maybe I wonder if I'm cheating a little bit, because if you base your layout on a film, you can use artistic license or director's license to a large degree, someone may say, well, that loco wasn't around at that time, but it was in the film. That's my get out clause.
Right.
So, yeah, I feel that I'm not just asking people to stop and look at a model railroad layout. I'm asking them to embrace a concept and get to know the film, and it's combining the 2 passions and 2 hobbies at once.
You mentioned that you used a lot of YouTube videos to learn the hobby, and now you're paying it forward with a channel of your own. Talk about the development of Model Railway Quest.
Well, again, it wasn't something I ever planned to do. And if you'd asked me, even when I started building Brief Encounter, it wasn't really on the plan. And together with grumpy cameraman, as we call him. He's the other half who does all the filming but is never seen on camera. It was a discussion we had several times about whether we should start the YouTube channel. And I was a bit reluctant because I thought, oh gosh, because I'm a beginner. And I did think, who is going to want to listen to me? There are so many more qualified people out there. But then I thought, well, I love this so much. I love that I've built this. I've loved that I've learned the hobby, and I want to share what I love. Plus, there are also other beginners out there. And I'm really interested in the people who are thinking, I'd love to build a model railroad, but aren't, confident to do it. Those are kind of the audience I kind of addressed at the start when we started Model Railway Quest. I was always thinking of those people who are thinking, oh, I'd love to have a go at this hobby. And it was really about encouraging them and saying, if I can do it, you can do it. And making it fun. We don't take ourselves too seriously. But I wanted to share every aspect of the hobby, from going to a model railroad show to tutorials. How do you build this? How do you make that? To interviewing people who are in the hobby and finding out what brings the hobby to life for them. It really was about, look, I love this hobby and I want you to love it too. And this is how I'm going to share it, using all the skills I've learned in TV. I just want to bring those to the YouTube channel. And it's just been a lot of fun. It's so much fun. We've met so many great people. We've had so many opportunities to travel and have experiences. It's been wonderful.
We all know that the British lead in comedy. And if you don't know that, I'll tell you, British lead in comedy. Talk about how you're mixing that fun and entertainment along with providing educational as well, and how you mix that up and keep it fun with yourself and, of course, the grumpy cameraman.
Well, thank you very much for saying that about British comedy. I would agree with you being British, but we love it that you agree. Comedy is so, it's everybody has their own take on it, don't they? But again, I think it's just that we don't take ourselves too seriously. And if we're not having fun, then I kind of feel that our viewers aren't going to have fun. So we do a weekly live stream. It's very, we just go with the flow and have fun. It's a lot of production involved in it, I have to say. I put a lot of high quality production in it, but we always remember this is a hobby. It's meant to be enjoyable. When we go out and film, we're always trying to find the humor in it. But I have an advantage because Grumpy Cameraman used to be a stand-up comedian. You won't mind me telling you that. He was on the circuit for a few years and headline act at a comedy club here in the UK. So, well, you could call it comedy, I guess. He likes to kind of see the funny side of things. Yeah. But if we're not making it fun, then, it makes humor goes a long way, doesn't it? And I think it just breaks the tension and helps people learn in a more enjoyable way.
Folks come to Model Railway Quest not only for the fun, but to also learn. But talk about what you've learned about the hobby from doing the channel.
Well, as I say at the start, I didn't know what I didn't know, let's put it that way. But I've had just wonderful support from subscribers, viewers, who will educate me, if I get something wrong, but in the most polite way. And I love that. They'll say, I think you'll find, Dawn, that you've said this wrong or you have got that wrong. And I'm open to it because I'm thinking, I'm learning as well. But I was thinking about this the other day. I didn't realize how seriously people take this hobby and how it's a whole world in itself. I dipped my toe in it 2 years ago, and here I am going to model railroad shows and interviewing people. And it's become more of a hobby. It's not just a hobby for some people. It's a way of life. And I think people are passionate about locos and they're passionate about model railways and they're passionate about the history of railroads. And so it's important to honor that and respect it and make sure when we're filming something that we get it right. And we respect their love of the hobby. And if we're doing that, then we won't go too far wrong.
You started Model Railway Quest while you were still building your first module. How important was it to start sharing even at the beginner level?
Oh, I think it was important because I wanted people to see me make mistakes as well. And they say when you teach, or when you're trying to teach somebody something, you teach at the level just below where you are. So of course, there's a whole wide audience that, knew at the time far more than I did. And I was aware that maybe, I wasn't sharing anything they didn't know. But then I started to think, well, actually, I can bring my own research skills as a TV producer. One thing I know I love doing, it, and I know I'm good at it, is research. And I was able to find information and facts and stats that maybe even they didn't know. I started a series called Lokonori. It's a play on this children's TV series called Jackanory, where I just talk to the camera and I tell stories, and I tell stories about famous people or people who are instrumental in changing railroad history and model railroad history. And I found researching these people just incredibly rewarding, and telling their stories incredibly rewarding. And that's been received very, very well. And we now do series, we're going to do another batch in a few months' time. But I think it's, I love finding out facts. I love researching, and I want everyone to know these things. I want to share them. And I think there's nothing better than sharing what you know, so that we all learn it. We can all learn it. And so, yeah, I don't, what's the saying? Don't wait until you're ready. Start before you're ready, and just keep going.
Great advice for sure. And speaking of advice, for someone who is considered a beginner, and you went through that beginner process not too long ago, speaking to someone who is an experienced model railroader, what are some of the things that they can start doing better that will help beginners get into the hobby? Give them some advice as to how to help beginners. What are the things that they should be doing, and maybe some of the things they can stop doing?
I think the most important thing of all is remember, if you can, what it feels like to be a beginner, and how daunting it is and how intimidating it can be. If you walk into a room and everyone knows about model railroads and you don't, that is incredibly daunting. You may want to ask lots of questions, but you daren't, because you don't want to look stupid. So if you're an experienced model railroader and you're talking to beginners, know that they may not ask questions, but they still want to learn, and put yourself in their shoes. 2 is try not to use too much jargon to start with, and come at it, again, putting yourself in their shoes. You may talk about scales and gauges and, DC controllers and so on, but they may not even know what that means. So really start at a level, without being condescending or patronizing. Start as if you're explaining it to your grandmother, I guess is the expression. But also remember that new people in the hobby have new ideas and visions, and they may ultimately bring ideas into the hobby that may challenge what you think is right. But these new ideas may ultimately be good for the hobby. And fresh ideas, fresh enthusiasm, a new way of looking at things. That's how we keep this hobby alive.
Yeah, the hobby is certainly not dying. It is evolving. And I think all of those new ideas help the hobby evolve. And that's some fantastic advice to not only beginners in their mindset, but also experienced folks as well, and how they help encourage those with new ideas to step forward and come through one of the 1,000 doors of entry into our hobby. And speaking of keeping those doors open, we know there are additional challenges. You mentioned early on the uniqueness that you brought, and one of them is that you're a female in this hobby. Tell us what the challenges you've seen within the hobby of breaking that mold of sort of model railroaders are guys and they're a certain type of person. Talk about bringing and helping your role in bringing diversity to the hobby.
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't really at the start acknowledge that it would be so difficult to be a female in the hobby. And I have been, again, incredibly fortunate. I've had the majority of people, 99.9% of my viewers and subscribers, treat me as they would any other model railroader. And, it's just a question of, I've just felt overwhelming support. However, in talking to other women in the hobby, and I don't know if that's because I have a YouTube channel and maybe they talk to me differently, I don't know. But when I talk to other women in the hobby here in the UK and in the US and other countries, I have heard stories of, they don't really want to join their local model railroad club because they'd be the only woman, or I've heard stories of they've built a layout and they've had not so great comments. I've heard people talk about, just being dismissed. And it makes me, really, it's very sad to hear that, because I think, without getting into a big, war about men versus women, I don't think it should be that. I just think we all have a different take on what the hobby looks and feels like. Saying that, again, I would say, and I'm going to generalize, most women I know, like me, didn't grow up with model trains, whereas most men in the hobby I know started when they got a model train for Christmas, aged 4 or 5. And so they grew up and became familiar and knew how to run things. And it just became like riding a bike. For women coming into the hobby at a later age, and they go into a club and surrounded by people who know better and model better and so on and so forth, it's so daunting. But in that same respect, like me with Brief Encounter, they're bringing their own unique vision to the model railroad hobby and maybe creating layouts and scenery that hasn't been seen before. So I like that. I like that there's a new kind of perspective. But again, from my own personal experience, I've had overwhelming support. Is there further to go? Of course there is. It would be lovely to see more women in the hobby. And I have a Women Model Railroaders Facebook group, and I'm trying to encourage more women that way. I know other people, the lovely Michelle Kempener is doing with the Women's Special Interest Group, bringing more women into the hobby. So it's changing, and that's a wonderful thing to see.
First, a woman who is facing that gatekeeping, what would be your advice to them?
Don't take it personally. I think don't see it as an obstacle. Just see it as a mindset that exists, but it shouldn't stop you doing what you're doing. Remember why you want to do this. Remember that, there's joy in this. You're doing this for a reason. And remember that, you may get 1 or 2 odd comments, but they are just that, 1 or 2 odd comments. Find the people who support you, because there's loads of people who will support you out there.
I think that's also some very sound advice from Dawn, who's taken a friend's layout and painting figures to go on a true model railway quest, going through a multitude of different movies and getting out an exhibition, sharing it with folks. Dawn, could you ever imagined when you first painted those figures that you'd be in this spot right now? Does this surprise you?
It absolutely does. I never would have imagined this in a million years. If you'd said to me, Dawn, in 2-3 years' time, you'll be 2 layouts down, a model railroad YouTube channel, I would have laughed out loud. It was the last thing I thought I would be doing. But thank goodness I painted my friend's figures on his layout, because it's opened up an incredible world. And not just the hobby itself, and the modeling itself, but the people I've met. I've made some of the best friends, and I know they're going to be friends for life. They're just beautiful people who I am so grateful and lucky to call friends. I've met so many interesting people who are passionate about this hobby, and it's just given me a whole new respect for model railroading and the people who love it and keep it going.
Tell us where we can find out more about your Model Railway Quest.
Well, you can find Model Railway Quest on YouTube at Model Railway Quest. Just type that into the search field. We're on Facebook, Model Railway Quest, and Instagram and TikTok. Mainly we're on YouTube, though. We, produce maybe 3-4 videos a month. And also on a Wednesday evening, 7:30 p.m. on UK time, we have our live stream, the Wednesday Express, not stopping at Peterborough.
And it's funny you mentioned that it's on Wednesday evenings. At first, I started watching and I went, why are they doing it in the middle of the day? And then you realize the time difference. It's your evening while I'm driving around on a Wednesday working, but it's great. I get something to listen to when I'm able to jump in and check out what's going on your Model Railway Quest YouTube channel. And of course, we'll share all the links to that in our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/249. Dawn, thank you so much for coming by and sharing your model railroading story with us.
Thank you so much, Ray. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.